Welcome to the Marne Report.
Hey there, Fort Stewart. It's Kevin Larson from the Fort Stewart Public Affairs Office with this week's edition of the Marne Report, and I'm joined by James Atwater, the director of the 3rd Division Museum on Fort Stewart, and he's going to tell us why 14 July 1918 is an important date. James, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. The reason it's so important is it's kicked off one of the most important battles for the division during World War I. This division has 3 great defensive actions, and the Second Battle of the Marne is the most important of those 3, at least for World War I is concerning. The other 2 would be Anzio during World War II, and the 3rd is the Korean War, when we defended the last port in North Korea, so 10th Corps can properly exfil, along with about 90,000 North Korean refugees after the Chinese entered the invasion.
Some pretty heavy stuff, pretty important history. So back to World War I, July 14th.
Basically what happens is we were holding an 8-mile defensive perimeter along the Marne River. We had the French division to our right. The Germans were planning a massive invasion. They were trying to punch through. The war had been dragging on. We entered the war late, though. We entered the war in 1917. Officially, U.S. combat troops don't hit the front line until 1918. The war had been raging since 1914. The British, the French, they're exhausted. We were fresh manpower in, and the Germans, they wanted to punch through and grab Paris. They're hoping that they can capture Paris. The French would collapse. The French army had already mutinied once during the war.
Really?
Over offensive operations.
Wow.
World War I is a meat grinder. Machine guns and artillery were God. It was a defensive war. While tanks were created for World War I, the truth of the matter is they didn't provide what they were hoping for. They were just technically complex. They were hoping to be able to punch through and allow rapid movement.
Right.
But, there was new technology, and they had their issues. But it was a beginning step. The French revolt. Basically, they were tired of costly offensive operations. That wasn't to say that they, if the Germans had tried to run when that revolt was happening, the defensive operations, that's an entirely different operations. I think the Germans tried to push when that happened, they would have stood their ground. But again, it was a massive casualty. Some of the campaigns that took place before we entered the war, by the time the campaigns were done, when you add the casualties to both sides, you're talking over 1 million soldiers, all combined.
Right.
So it was a massively high casualty war.
True. So you've got the French on either side of...
On one flank, yes. They hit both the French and the 38th and the 30th regiments of the 3rd Division. The 30th Infantry Regiment kind of, over the course of the assault, would bend back. The French division would fall back and leave the flank. The 30th 8th Regiment would actually send up the river and hold their ground. But it started off, actually on the 14th, it was near midnight, we actually knew they were coming, so we started an artillery barrage. It was actually after midnight of the 15th that the Germans responded. At that time in World War I, today we're used to technology and difference, but that time you had to send patrols across the river to try to capture information, and we're fortunate that one of those patrols turned up information that we could find enough information that we knew the Germans were coming at us, and we could prepare a defensive action. And the idea of preparatory bombardment before them is to try to catch their assault forces out in the open. Some German units were caught in the open, that barrage, but it actually begins an artillery barrage back and forth between our forces and the Germans. And it was a mixture of high explosive and chemical warfare, gas and chlorine.
And this was at Chateau Thierry on the Marne River, where this was all happening?
Down the river from Chateau, but yeah, on the Marne. It was on the Marne River. And it began. It was a tough fight. But fortunately, they had to cross a river. and it was heavy. Now the problem is the communications at that time. Radios existed, but they were too fragile for the front line. So the front line commanders had to communicate back with the battalions and with the brigade headquarters via either hardline or runners. But the problem with that heavy artillery barrage is the hard lines were cut. So then it was down to runners. But in that artillery barrage, runners got lost, got killed, got wounded. The terrain changed. So you had to deal with that, and because it was chemical warfare, soldiers had to put their masks on, and they were wearing their masks for the entire time. They weren't the best masks to see out of.
Limits your field of vision. You're running around through pockmarked landscape, trenches, barbed wire, wood, shrapnel, just chaos everywhere. So, that's truly, like you said, a meat grinder in World War I.
Yeah, and you take soldiers through and you look at the gas mask. Modern soldiers had full total head covers for gas. Back then, it was literally a mask. So actually, the rear line commanders had to keep in mind of getting reinforcements up so they can pull the front line soldiers off to get them out of their clothes because they were contaminated with gas and chlorine. Chlorine and mustard were the two most common gases used.
So here's the 3rd Infantry Division in the thick of it, facing these new technologies, gas warfare, large caliber artillery rounds, air warfare, all these things. And in the face of that, they stand fast, and ever since then, they've been known as the
Rock of the Marne. And one important thing about the battle is the communications broke down because of the artillery barrage. The decisions made that helped win the battle for the Americans and fight off, and you're talking hours of constant combat. It was decisions made by the frontline commander. You're talking the captains. You're talking about senior NCOs. You're talking your captains, lieutenants are making decisions that help win this war. So it's important to understand when you try to train your soldiers. It's important to understand how important it is to have seniors enlisted and officers on the front line be knowledgeable enough and capable enough to make decisions, because they can't wait for somebody who's cut off from the rear to come down, and because there's no satellite coverage, there's no satellite phones. Yes, you have air warfare in the early stages, but still, it is a fully on-the-ground, full combat, and it's up to the individual soldiers. And so that's one of the real testaments to the Second Battle of the Marne and to the soldiers that sat on the front end, is they made the decisions on the front line that helped stop the assault of the Germans coming across the river.
So individual unit and leadership initiative is what stemmed the flow of the Germans. Yeah,
and the Captain Jesse Wooldridge was key in the middle of that. When that assault started, his company had almost 260 men. By the time it was done, he had 60 men, less than 60 men.
Wow, and still combat effective.
Well, they were still fighting until the Germans finally fell back.
Wow, fantastic. That truly is indicative of the legacy of the 3rd Infantry Division. And, as part of that, becoming the Rock of the Marne, in the midst of that battle, the commanding general is said to have said to his French counterparts, "Nous resterons là," which, of course, means, we shall remain. Right. So that's not just rumor. He actually did say that, didn't he?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you yes or no. My other coworker, John Potter, actually is far more knowledgeable on this, and whether or not he said that or not. So I'm not going to say yes or no, but it is very possible that was said. But sometimes myths become legends. And
true. And history is written by the victors.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. So as part of that history, legacy, this is when the 3rd ID patch is created too.
Correct.
The famous blue with the 3 white stripes.
Correct.
And this campaign, the Aisne-Marne offensive, is one of those campaigns that's represented by the 3 lines, and the other 2 are...
Well, 3 lines are actually the offensive operations, not the defensive operations. And the funny thing about it is one of the offensive operations we were only the reserves. We didn't actually get called up, but we were slated as a reserve organization to be activated, and that didn't happen. So they are the 3 offensive operations, and also we were the 3rd Division. During World War I, all the divisions were known as 1st Division, 2nd Division, because every division deployed was an infantry division. It wasn't until World War II where you started seeing the specialized monikers, infantry, armor, cavalry, mountain divisions to show up.
After this brief message and short break, we'll be right back.
Are you looking for more places to get your news? Subscribe to the Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield YouTube channel. As we add to this platform throughout the year, users will have access to installation tours, news updates, and plenty of motivating videos featuring 3ID soldiers and more. Visit youtube.com and search Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield.
And we're back. We've already kind of touched on it a little bit. The initiative shown by, the soldiers that are in close contact with the enemy, communications are broken down, they have to make decisions. How does this historic event back in World War I, how does that contribute to what the 3rd Infantry Division, that was once known as the 3rd Division, how does that contribute to their legacy of who they are today, what they do today?
It's about leading from the front. Being able to make decisions in the combat zone. This division has a long history of leading from the front. I mean, even the operations in Iraq, you're talking about we were the spearhead out of Kuwait for one of the 2 assault columns. We were the division that did the 2 assaults into Baghdad, with the second one being the seizure of the palaces, which effectively ended the first phase of operations in Iraq. So that comes to an important point. It's also important that the frontline commanders are able to make decisions effectively okay, we're on the ground, things are changing with the fluidity of the battlefield. Yeah, even though you have communications that you can sit there and talk to people back in the Pentagon, the frontline commanders, it's so important for them to be able to make decisions without having people nitpick and says, okay, I see this going on, no one else sees it, I got to adjust what I'm doing to deal with this type of operations on the hurry.
So is there anything else you'd like to add about the 3rd Infantry Division's history to close out the show?
The division has very long, and you could spend days talking about the 3rd Division history. And then if you want to go back into some of the regiments with the divisions and their history, it's like the 7th, it goes all the way back to the War of 1812, which...
Cotton balers, by God.
Yeah. Even though they started as the 8th Infantry, now at the 7th. But, you're talking about a long and dedicated history of really looking into it. It's find it interesting, though, and a lot of people focus on the war, but for 38 years, we stood at the doorstep, especially with the going to Ukraine. 38 years, this division was at the front line in Germany. They weren't expected. Our job was to slow the Soviets when they came through the Volga Gap.
Yep.
Long enough for the follow-on forces from the United States to come in. So often that gets overlooked, and it shouldn't. They didn't deploy to Vietnam, but they still stood there.
They did.
It was a sentinel. So most people, getting Germany, hey, that's great. By the way, if the Soviets do come,
guess what?
Yeah, you're on the front line, and you're not expected to survive.
That's what Reforger was for.
Yep.
Redeploying forces, Germany.
And a lot of times we played OPFOR for that. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of good books written. I've been looking for a lot of good sources and secondary books from Germany. There's not a lot of them good out there. What I've been finding actually is from a German model they create books that are about 60 pages long. Company's called Tankograd, and it's both English and American, and geared more toward modelers, but they do talk. They focus on a lot of American activities during the Cold War. And sometimes they bring up the 3rd ID, and they got good photographs of vehicles and equipment, how they were painted, marked, and talking about that. So I've been buying those when I can, just to help brush up on that time period as well.
That is a fascinating topic, close to my heart, because I spend many an hour painting little model tanks, and I often wish that decals and model kits reflected, 3rd ID or 1st Armored or 3rd Armored even, because these were units that are near and dear to my heart, because my dad was part of 3rd ID in Germany when I was little, and then 1st Armored, and then 3rd Armored, and then 1st Armored. So yes, there is a lack of source material out there to really see how tanks, M60s, were painted back during the Cold War, and then M1s, and well,
the one thing about this company is that there was a really fun time in Europe in the 70s and 80s where they were experimenting with different camouflage patterns. Not just the 4 pattern, but there was an early digital. There was also
Dual-Tex, I think it was called, and 7th Cav was the ones who tested it out. Yes.
Yeah, and actually, Third ID had some vehicles painted in one. There was a
Really?
Dual-Tex, Master, Murdeck, which became common before the 3rd camouflage, and actually that tanker guide company actually published a book on it. And so I saw that and I bought it, and I said, hey, that's a cool topic.
That is fascinating. I do like talking about camouflage. And you're saying there's a 3rd ID vehicle that was painted in the...
I don't remember if it's Dual-Tech or Master.
Might have been Master. Because I did see something like the Rogue Runner, some M60 painted with that.
Yeah, this was a
Forerunner of Murdeck.
It's over in my office, but if you ever have a chance, come by and take a look at it.
Sounds good. And then a plug for the museum, since we're talking the museum. You're back open for public visits.
Yeah.
What are your hours?
Our hours are from 9 to 4 o'clock, Tuesday through Friday. Every first Saturday of the month is also open. Unfortunately, with a staff of 2, we're limited on the ability to open up on weekends. But if you have any questions, feel free to come by, ask us, call us. If you're military, look up on the global, James Atwater. I'm on there, and the other coworker is John Potter. He's also on there. We'll be more than happy to field questions.
Sounds great. Well, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you about World War I history of the 3rd Division, and then touching a little bit on the Cold War, and then making a plug for the museum here on Fort Stewart. Anything else you want to close out with?
No, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope you and everyone else enjoy your weekend.
Sounds good. Well, folks, that's it for this edition of the Marne Report, and join us again when we talk about other fun topics that relate to Fort Stewart, Hunter Army Airfield, and the 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne. See you guys on the airwaves next time.
Are you a civilian, spouse, or family member who is interested in working for the Army? Check out the Army Fellows Program. This 2-year program allows you to experience the work environment of the Department of Defense while blending work assignments and developmental opportunities that will help you grow into an Army civilian professional with eligibility for permanent placement across the Army. For more information, visit portal.chra.army.gov.